Every day is Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Podcast descriptions. It is Friday, March 17th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, executive editor of The American Prospect, David Dayen, will be with us. Look back on the week that was. Talk about banks. Also on the program today, Matt Strackbein, also known as the Letterhack.
Woo!
And filmmaker Janek Ambros, the filmmaker who made Mondo Hollywoodland, and the animator who drew and produced Mondo Hollywoodland cartoon or animated book. Also on the program today, 11 of the biggest banks inject billions into First Republic to save another one of those so-called mid-size banks. Xi visits Russia. This on the day that the U.S. releases a video of a Russian fuel dump on an American drone. Protests erupt in France over proposed retirement age hike by Macron. Literally just by Macron. Elite military commanders in Israel plan a walkout over Bibi's Supreme Court evisceration plan. Tennessee Nissan plant votes down union. Senate advances the repeal of the Iraq war authorizations. The North Dakota Supreme Court blocks an abortion ban as Utah bans all abortion clinics. Florida now the 8th state to ban a parent's ability to authorize transgender health care for their kids. Kentucky legislature does the same thing, and new data links COVID origins to raccoon sales in the Wuhan wet market. Lastly, I guess, for sure, the Massachusetts Supreme Court upholds the right for rudeness in town hall meetings. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Casual Friday, so casual that I'm going to be stumbling all over myself because I'm a little bit tired. Yeah, someone already just said, concerned viewer, just is Sam okay? I'm tired. I didn't get enough sleep last night.
But your tiredness is kind of translating into general goofiness, which is always the best version of tired, at least for me. Because
I'm not cranky, but I'm also...
You're just delirious.
I'm not lucid. So...
yeah. I just want to say that right to be rude, that I think that is a good, important step for democracy. Mm-hmm. You yourself are a victim of a sort of code of, I don't know, conviviality that gets you canceled from platforms because apparent rudeness or something, alleged rudeness.
Totally.
And I would just say there's no light without heat, and like, good job, Massachusetts.
Honestly, this should be a constitutional provision.
Well, I do have some mixed feelings on this. We'll talk about it later in the program. But
okay, I'm surprised by that.
Well, I was going to go into it, but we want to get to the guests and whatnot. But Southborough, just a bunch of snowflakes there.
Oh yeah.
You know. So, I mean, they're not as bad as Auburn, but Go into Southborough. Everybody's got a tiptoe around everybody there.
Wow.
It's really...
Wouldn't have expected that.
I didn't know that your subjective opinions about regions were going to overtake your
It's not a
principle
region.
like this.
It's just a town.
No.
I mean,
Well,
it's no, Pittsburgh. But Auburn is just like, oh, please, why with such snowflakes? I'm sorry. We'll do this another time. Yep. Okay.
okay.
Let's get right into this. I've watched some real abominations on, to bring on David Sachs to talk about the bank failures is, I mean, and ostensibly from shows that sell themselves as lefty shows is pretty stunning. I mean, some people are just absolute idiots, and some people are just sort of like, incredibly shameless in their grift. But don't ever utter the word neoliberal if you could bring David Sachs on to explain to you what should be done and whose fault the banking crisis was. My God.
Pair this.
Do people not understand that the word neoliberal comes from essentially like the original neoliberals were von Mises and Hayek at Mont Pelerin, and
No, it means it's a woman with a shrill voice that I don't like.
It's New Democrats that do identity politics.
It's so,
when a Democrat's
so
cringy.
So dumb. It just and unforgivably dumb. You don't have a politics YouTube show for 12 years and still sort of like justify being an idiot because I do comedy.
Yeah. Well, when he's not interviewing David Sachs, he's going through my Twitter mentions and retweeting replies to me where none of the topics have anything to do with him.
8 years ago, Jimmy Dore was sitting with the CFO of TYT talking about how great David Sachs' partner at PayPal would be in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, this is full circle.
Yep. All right. But getting on to actually and we've outlined, we're going to outline this again with Dayen. There are multiple levels to the extent that we have a banking crisis, why that's happening. But all of the commentary and all of the explanations as to why there was a bank run, as to why Silicon Valley Bank and other banks of its ilk may be over-leveraged, may be undercapitalized. All of these subsidiary questions are subsidiary to the one simple fact that banking regulations were rolled back and no longer were applied to banks that had less than $250 billion in assets, as opposed to less than $50 billion in assets. And the reason why it was at $50 billion in assets was because if a bank goes under, it has less than $50 billion worth of assets, okay, some people are going to get burned, but it's not going to bring down the system. And that's it, bottom line. Here's Elizabeth Warren at the Senate Finance Committee hearing talking about that rollback, because everything else that we can talk about with the so-called bank crisis is a function of this, and we would not be talking about it. The FDIC takes over banks fairly regularly.
It was like every other week in 2008.
In 2008, it was more than that even. But it, even in the course of like everything's going smoothly, they'll do one every couple of months. We never hear about it because it doesn't matter. And SBV really wouldn't have been a story outside of tech bubble circles if it weren't for the fact that there was no regulation on it.
Enhanced liquidity requirements that ensure that banks have enough cash on hand to meet their obligations, particularly in times of stress, capital requirements that better position banks to absorb losses, regular resolution plans to help guide regulators safely through winding down failed banks. All of these were weakened in 2018, and when SVB failed. This is a part, in my view, of the Fed's actions that led to weaker regulation. Over the last few days, we've heard a lot of Republicans say that this collapse wasn't their fault. It was the banking regulators who were asleep at the wheel. And believe me, I have questions for a lot of the banking regulators. But Congress handed Chair Powell the flamethrower that he aimed at the banking rules. In fact, he said so himself, I'll quote and then I'll quit. When he announced that he was weakening regulations for the banks like SBV, Chair Powell said, and I quote, "In the rules before us, we are applying the discretion granted to us by the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act." Translation, Congress opened the door to weaker regulations, and I'm waltzing right through it. That's true. Congress needs to close that door.
That's the bottom line. From 2001 to 2023, like when we were at the height of the crisis in 2009, 2008, 2009, you were getting you had 140 banks in 2009 that were taken over by FDIC.
Wow. So I was lowballing.
Well, in 2010, it was 157. By the time you get to 2014, it was 18 banks. 2015, 8 banks. 2016, 5 banks. 2017, 8 banks. 2018, 0 banks. 2019, 4 banks. 2020, 4 banks. 21 and 22, no banks. This year, 2 banks. The reason why we're hearing about this is because of that rollback. Mm-hmm. Because it's a big bank. And then the other reason why we're hearing about it is because it's all a bunch of tech pros who have access to the way that we create stories now.
And who are using media operations like CNBC to beg for money. And there are a lot of people following suit with that. And
we'll talk to Dayen about this too, because a lot of these people have the phone numbers for Janet Yellen and for Powell and for people in the administration, et cetera, et cetera. And that, of course, Dayen will walk us through this, but essentially they get on television and say, the sky is falling. Mm-hmm. We've got to save the depositors, without really saying like, oh, incidentally, I'm either a depositor or I've got $200 million in that bank, or some of the key elements of my investment portfolio, they have their payrolls, there or something.
And good on Elizabeth Warren for being consistent on, she said from day one, Biden should not be, for bipartisanship reasons, keeping Jerome Powell on as the head of the Fed. She's been continuously critical of him throughout this process, and it's paying dividends now because we hear that he is fighting tooth and nail to get rid of, and Dayen wrote this up, any kind of mention of regulation as a response to this.
We will talk to Dayen about that in a moment. Just a word from our sponsor today, my favorite sponsor, ladies and gentlemen, Sunset Lake. Sebede.com. You use the coupon code 20 left is best. You get 20% off everything at sunsetlakesebede.com. Folks, there not only is there tinctures great to go to sleep, they got melatonin in one of their tinctures. They've got multiple flavors of their tinctures, multiple strengths of their tinctures, but they also have smokables. They have great. I had over the last weekend great coffee with Sebede in it, which is my weekend brew. They have a fudge with Sebede. They got great gummies. They got gummies with 0.3 THC. So the Sebede and THC. And I have to say, for those of us who don't indulge in THC in the way that we used to when we were younger, that stuff is, that's an evening, and for a guy like me. And they have, like I said, smokables, just a great product, great integrity. It is all checked by third parties. They don't use any pesticides or herbicides. They use integrated pest management. They use regenerative farming practices. They are great movement partners. They've donated thousands of dollars to striker work funds, to immigration resettlement, to food pantries, to give directly. They just all around, they do great business practices, $20 minimum wage, but mostly employee-owned company. Just a great bunch of folks and a great product. And, there's something called now that I've been hearing about called the entourage effect. Are you familiar with the entourage effect?
Like the
no.
HBO show?
No.
Okay.
It is like, I'm learning more about THC as it is now legal in New York State. And, you're learning about like terpenes and this and that and all this other stuff. But they're also finding that like it's not always your THC level. When you combine it with CBD, it creates what they call an entourage effect and can elongate certain things.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that's something to...
And maybe throw on some entourage.
quite literally put into your pipe and smoke it. So that is 20% off. Use the coupon code Left is Best, sunsetlakecbd.com. Also, our sponsor today, Aura. They make it possible for me not to be constantly worried about my identity being stolen. And I worry about that all the time because God knows where my kids are on, on the internet and whatnot. But data leaks constantly. We see it all the time. When you put your email address into Aura, when you input it with a 2-week free trial, it will kick back to you all the places where that email and the password associated with it has been compromised. You will see who have had data leaks. You will see what stuff is being sold on the dark web, including your social security number if it's out there. All this stuff, super important for you to know because the stuff gets traded back and forth. And at one point, they're going to come after you. These hackers or phishers or this and that, they're going to try and break into your accounts. And there'll be accounts that you don't even remember that you signed up for. But if you used your password and email combination that you use in other places, that data leak happens there. Could have happened a year ago. It's being traded. And at one point, these guys are going to go through it and try it on like banking sites or other sites or your Twitter or whatever it is. Aura, it protects you from those scammers and hackers. They also help you fight back against those websites that put all your information, your public information out there from the phone book or whatnot. It keeps you from getting, reducing robocalls. It keeps you from getting junk mail and operational security because they send automatic takedown notices. Or it gives you near-time real alerts on suspicious credit inquiries, like if someone's trying to open up a credit card in your name. Maybe they get like one of those, they steal your mail and they take one of those credit card offers and they try and do that type of thing, or they open a loan in your name. Aura will let you know about that immediately. Their VPN allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and personal information safe and encrypted. They protect your devices from viruses, malware, and spyware. They also can restrict the way that your kids use their devices. Make sure that they're doing focus time, or there's no apps that they can get that you don't approve of, or that they can't use their phones for 12 hours at a click. They also have a password manager that allows you to store and access your online passwords securely and conveniently. And the bottom line is you may have an app that does one of these things. Well, Aura does all 7. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up right now, Aura is going to give you a 2-week free trial, my link. That link, aura.com/majority. You start your free trial. You will be shocked, like I say, of how much of your private information Aura finds exposed over those 2 weeks. Aura, AURA.com/majority. We'll put a link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Quick break. We'll be right back with David Dayen. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report, joining us on the program, rejoining us, as it were. David Dayen, the executive editor of The American Prospect. And you could follow David at on Twitter at, what's your Twitter handle?
At D-Dayen, where I got laptops, I got phones, I got it all.
I told the story. Somebody
I got a trench coat open. I got watches.
Somebody sent me a link to the offer that was on your Twitter feed. You know, giving away a MacBook Pros for like, I'll give away 2 for $1,000, and I'll sign my name on it. And
you say no?
Okay. My first reaction was like, oh, they're doing some weird fundraiser for the Prospect. I mean, good for Dayen, and so I texted you, and you were just like, God, dude, why would you think I'm giving away laptops? And I'm like, I don't know, but I just thought I could buy both my kids a laptop for $600.
Not just you. I've had like New York Times reporters write me. I've had like an insane number of people that should know better say, hey, you got those laptops? No, of course I don't. I don't have a side hustle in laptops.
I mean, it could have been a fundraiser, but okay. All right, so we've talked about that. You should really get you should check out our sponsor today, aura.com, because this type of thing, I mean, you said like it came from a
well, I don't know what it came from. I mean, 6 months ago, as Emma mentioned before we got on, I was hacked. That was my fault. I clicked on something bad. This time, I was just on the site. I was just scrolling, and all of a sudden I lost control of it. And this happened, and you know,
can you use a special password for Twitter, please?
I do. That's not the issue. The issue is that now there's just no security on this site. As you, I mean, there are a couple weird things about it. I had just got done doing a viral thread about blowing up David Sachs, who is like Elon's best friend, and then suddenly I get hacked. Like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you know, you do the math. And yeah, our health insurance at our company is part of DC HealthLink, which has been hacked, and all the personal information of that has been sent out on the dark web. So I mean, you know, look, you're just not very secure anywhere, least of all Twitter, where it's now been a week and that scam is still running. And despite it being reported hundreds of times by followers of me who instantly then get blocked. So now, like, if I ever get the thing back, I have all these people blocked that I don't know about. There's because, you know, the Twitter offices now have tumbleweed through them to a greater degree than people. There's no way to deal with this, really, it seems. And I may never
should have paid you $8, bud. Should have paid your $8 a month.
It's a shame because I'm sure Elon would want you on his platform breaking all this news this week, but he just couldn't get around to it.
He's working on it. I know people who've been who are verified who've been hacked like this. I mean, this is an epidemic, and there actually are stories coming out about this. It's kind of a larger thing. You know, obviously it's personal for me, but it's the fact that, you know, when we make these essential communications pieces of infrastructure, and then you put absolutely no effort into the information security around them, they become very inviting targets. You know, I had like 83,000 followers who, you know, have sort of a personal relationship with the feed and are willing to believe that I sell laptops on the side.
I mean, look, you could have had extra laptops, whatever. But the point is, there's also a lot of people who are probably getting scammed.
That's the other thing. And I can't do anything to help them right now because I can't get in there. So, I mean, I'm more concerned about the fact that the thing is still active and not suspended than I am about getting it back.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about what you had tweeted before that. And let's start there, because I just watched a David Sachs being interviewed on the Jimmy Dore show, who was explaining and I could have watched him on the Glenn Greenwald show on Rumble.
And you could have paid like $3,000 minimum to get into that fundraiser that he threw for Ro Khanna. Then maybe you could have had an in-person conversation. You might have had to go up to $13,000, as you guys wrote about in the prospect.
Now, just to be fair, David Sachs has no deposits, according to him, in SBV. Now, of course, he does have a lot of companies that he's invested in have deposits there, but that doesn't mean that he would have any interest in any type of
gives him no personal
incentive, none whatsoever. But in the 40-minute interview that I saw, he basically blamed the Fed for this, but because their interest rates were so low that it caused everybody to over leverage and get stuck with bonds that were not valuable and with interest rates that were so low that they were looking for other places to put their money, and that it caused runaway inflation, and that's why the Fed had to raise their rates so much. That was his story. Tell us what the real story is, please.
Well, I mean, the important thing to know about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and the subsequent actions is that everyone was at fault. And when everyone's at fault, that makes it supremely easy for individual people who were at fault to point to the other person who was at fault to deflect blame. So you can go right on down the line and see failures here at pretty much every level. And I almost don't know where to begin, because you could begin at any part of this story.
Well, let's start.
Yeah,
but this is what I think we should start at, because from my perspective, there is the most upstream cause of this was the rollback. Mm-hmm. I mean, and you tell me if I'm wrong. In other words,
the deregulation.
The deregulation in 2017, 2018. If that doesn't happen, there may be problems at SBV, but they're not allowed to grow, to metastasize like this.
Well, I mean, and you have groups like the Bank Policy Institute, which is a bunch of bank lobbyists, saying that no, actually, the deregulation wouldn't have changed this at all. So, I mean, you have there's contestation going on at every level of this, and finger pointing going on at every level of this. But it is absolutely clear that the 2018 deregulation bill, which I call the Crapo bill because it reflects both its author and its content, Mike Crapo, the senator from Idaho, that bill absolutely was laser targeted at the very regional banks that are experiencing crisis right now. The stadium banks, as I called it, that aren't big enough to be a global systemic financial institution. However, they are big enough to get naming rights to a stadium. These are the banks that are in this wheelhouse right now. And the biggest things in that bill helped those banks. It did two major things. One was increasing the threshold for enhanced prejudicial regulation from 50 billion in assets to 250 billion in assets. So increasing that threshold, which meant that everyone that was at 47 billion, 50 billion, and didn't want to go over that line because they would get a whole bunch more compliance risk that they would have to deal with, then they can say, oh, now the line's up here. We can keep growing. We can keep eating other community banks.
We can get five times as large.
We can get 5 times as big. And that's exactly what Silicon Valley Bank did. And it's what Signature Bank did. There's that part of it. And then
let me just ask you a question about that, though, because wasn't the theory that, and I think Powell's argument was these are not, I don't know exactly the term of art. These banks do not constitute a systemic risk, right? They're not big enough to constitute a systemic risk.
Right.
But if that's the case, why did the country come to a standstill for 3 days? Everybody's like this.
Well, and
definitionally, how could that be?
And indeed, to bail out the depositors, they had to invoke a systemic risk exception to the rules, because Dodd-Frank kind of banned bailouts, but there was this exception. They had to say, oh, these guys are a systemic risk, and that's why we have to do this. So it completely, refutes their entire point right there. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, we knew this going in. IndyMac was under $250 billion. Continental Illinois in the 80s was under $250 billion. There are all kinds of examples of banks of this size whose failure leads to a systemic problem. And so this was never, and by the way, if it wasn't for several Senate Democrats, this bill would never have happened. Mark Warner, John Tester, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Donnelly, they co-wrote this with Crapo.
Right.
And they are completely 100% responsible for this happening and are completely unashamed about it, because Warner, even now, is going on television saying that this was a good bill. And Tester is out, doing the blame game, pointing the finger at something else. And we can talk about that something else later. But so the bill did first the raising the threshold. The second thing it did is it invited the Fed to deregulate even further. It changed one word in a statute, a statute known as the tailoring rule. And this rule says that the Federal Reserve has the ability to tailor rules to what they see as the risk involved with that bank. And they changed that from the Fed may tailor rules to the Fed shall tailor rules. That's all they did. They changed one word. That shall triggered a process where the Fed had to undergo this look at all these banks of a particular size, and then see if they were going to change the rules. And that's exactly what they did in 2019. They tailored the rules to weaken them even further on the stadium banks, on the banks between $100 and $250 billion. Lael Brainerd, who is now the head of the National Economic Council, came out and said, this is a really bad idea. This is kind of stunning to see a dissent at the Fed at all. And she came out, she was a Fed governor at the time, and said, this is a really bad idea. This is going to increase risk in the system. This is going to increase financial instability. And this is going to make it more likely that there will be taxpayer bailouts. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. And
that's why she's now nominated to be the chair of the Fed, right? Because she clearly understood what the implications of this would be, and that is being rewarded by our system.
Right. Well, what we know is that the Fed doesn't give a crap about financial regulation or supervision at all. They see it as secondary to their macroeconomic policy role, when in fact what we learned this week is that it's central and inextricable from their macroeconomic policy role. And now we can start talking about the Fed in this, because not only did they roll back some of these rules, which was discretionary, it was discretionary deregulation what they did. They had the opportunity, they had to look to tailor the rules, but they didn't have to do it the exact way they did. And what they did is they went in the most deregulatory direction. So not only did they do that, but the primary supervisor of Silicon Valley Bank was the Federal Reserve. They were the regulator. They had the examiners, specifically the San Francisco Federal Reserve, the regional bank, which is part of the main central bank. Their examiners were the ones looking at Silicon Valley Bank. By the way, the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank was a director of the San Francisco Federal Reserve until Friday, until a week ago.
Interesting.
When suddenly on the website it says vacant under his name. So so what we learned today, there was a Bloomberg piece, San Francisco Fed trying to cover their ass. They put out this thing that says, oh, well, we sent them what are known as matters requiring attention. We saw that the bank had this interest rate risk because they put all their money, or a lot of their money, into long dated securities did well at low interest rates. And when the interest rates went up, the value of those securities went down. They didn't hedge that risk in any way. They tried to keep it in the hold for maturity on their books. In other words, they didn't want to realize those losses. They had these massive unrealized losses on their balance sheet. And then the bank also had this huge flight risk because most of their deposits were over $250,000. All of them came from the same industry of people who are on Slack with one another. So they didn't have 30,000 depositors. They had like 9 because it was just a bunch of people in VC chats with one another. And so they had this huge flight risk on one side, which would make them realize these losses, and these huge unrealized losses on the other side, which they were trying to skate around. But if as soon as there was any trouble at the bank and any kind of loss of deposits, they would have to realize those losses. And the San Francisco Fed, according to them in this story in Bloomberg, knew this and sent them these stern letters that said, you might want to take a look at this. You have no risk management on your interest rate. This is basic banking 101. You haven't accounted for the potential change in interest rates. And the bank did nothing. And the San Francisco Fed didn't follow up. They just sent letters.
Well, wasn't that because they are so woke because they're from San Francisco? Right?
It could be.
And they're infected with wokeness. And so they don't want to offend the bank in that instance. But
so
let me
here's what we have.
And just to be
here's
clear.
What we have, just
okay,
so I can just lay this all out. The bank has no risk management whatsoever. They didn't have a chief risk officer for 8 months. They had a really a time bomb portfolio, and they didn't change it. The supervisors didn't make them change it, didn't ask them to do anything out of the ordinary, gave them, sent a few letters, but did nothing beyond that to actually follow up. So they're at fault. The reason that these enhanced rules were put in under Dodd-Frank is because they knew that the examiners don't really do anything, and the enhanced rules would have forced much more stringent regulation. It would said, we're going to look at your liquidity on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a daily basis in some cases. We're going to force you into these stress tests. We're going to not allow you to opt out of things that would have forced you to put those unrealized losses into your capital rules. There were all kinds of rules that were put in there. The Fed and Congress got rid of them. So you have Congress being the problem. You have the Fed at the top level being the problem. You have the San Francisco Fed being the problem. You have Silicon Valley Bank being a problem. And you have depositors that are such dumbasses that they have millions, hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in a bank that it's
only insures 250. Yeah.
And it's public knowledge that they have a problem. There was a guy who was a short seller who was pointing this out months and months ago. And there was a story in the Wall Street Journal like half a year ago. And it's basic cash management of any business to not put all of your money in a place where you could lose it.
Okay. All right. So listen, on that point, there's two things that it seemed to me. One is that there are obvious mechanisms in which to protect that if you're a business. You got payroll. Your payroll is, let's say, I don't know, $1 million a month or something like that. There are third parties that essentially orchestrate your spreading of the cash around to different facilities, so it's all insured. And
the cash sweep, and it's been around for decades and decades and decades. And anything above that amount that covers payroll and other expenses on a short-term basis, why are you in a zero interest-bearing bank account? Put it into a security. What are you doing?
Right.
You're ruining it. Like your fiduciary duty to actually maximize your earnings is obliterated by that. Like Roku should have lost that money. Bottom line, they were stupid.
Well, wait a second. Now, were they stupid? Well, I mean, they were stupid. Well, they were stupid.
Yes.
But.
Well, they were penny wise and pounds.
Was there also was there kickbacks here?
Yes.
Like, I mean, that's the other thing.
Well,
is that,
by the way, there's a whole other part of this where Silicon Valley Bank actually had the cash sweep ability. It's on their website. It's advertised like you can do this to minimize your risk, and only a very small portion of their deposits actually took advantage of the opportunity. And I've been told a couple things by a couple different people. One is that the bank said that, only some people can access this, and we're getting around to making a change so everybody can access it, and then they never did. I've been told that VCs essentially told the companies, you have to bank and put all your money in this bank, and you can't move it around or do anything else. And in exchange, founders and VCs would get sweetheart deals, zero interest
yes, that's
loans,
what I'm saying. It's
low
kickback.
rate
That's a
mortgages.
kickback, isn't it?
There's corruption in here too, and I hope that does come out even further. But I mean, we already know about some of that stuff. First Republic, which is this other bank that's in trouble, they got a big cash infusion from the big banks of $30 billion, kind of a private rescue. They gave a below rate interest mortgage to Mark Zuckerberg as if he needed it, right? This is apparently in the tech world. This was like a quid pro quo.
I don't think it's just in the tech world.
Us.
I don't think it's just in the tech world. I mean, I think there's
there's
instances where you put money in
there
accounts.
Was the Friends of Angelo thing with Countrywide way back in the day. They would have, Chris Dodd got a cheap mortgage with Countrywide. I mean, yes, this stuff goes on.
You put enough money.
Part of this,
those VC, they weren't getting cheap mortgages. They were getting 0% mortgages.
Yeah.
That's what they were getting. You make sure you join the Diamond Club by making sure that we got $250 million, out of your companies in your portfolio. And, we'll give you a $10 million loan, 0% interest.
Right. And then the other thing is that Silicon Valley Bank was essentially investing in a lot of these companies on the side. So they were taking these deposits and then investing back into these companies in a way that was supposed to be prohibited by the Volcker rule, which was this thing about using depositor money to make risky trades.
Right.
Investing in high risk startups, it certainly would have been covered by the Volcker rule, but they got an exemption to that they also lobbied for. So there was a lot going on here with respect to the bank. But I don't think these depositors, these whiny VC idiots that think that they now have to reinvent insured cash sweeps or these kinds of things that get around the FDIC limits when they've already existed, much like when Uber and Lyft reinvented the bus, is just absolutely absurd.
But do you think that they think that you need to reinvent sweeps, or do you think that they're pretending that there's a problem here to justify having that kind of money in the bank unprotected because it was in the interest of the bank for them to do that, and they were getting kickbacks in the form of like sweetheart loans and stuff like that?
At first, I thought they were lying, but they're doing an incredibly good job of looking like dumb shits.
They're doing this is the classic stupid or evil debate, and I'm not convinced it has to be mutually exclusive.
It doesn't, but they're doing a fantastic job of looking like idiots.
When I see David Sacks going every single place he can go to get out the word that he was not, that he has, that it's not a question of regulation, and we need to fix the system so that people can do their payroll out of one bank. Like what?
Yeah, the goal of all this, from the perspective of the people who got the billions of dollars in government largesse, and by the way, not just at Silicon Valley Bank, but it's really much more important for the banks that didn't fail, that were on the precipice, because now they have access to a loan facility where they can put in all that stuff that they had losses on, all those long dated securities. They can get it for a year, get a loan from the Federal Reserve at par. In other words, this is worth X amount of dollars now, but we'll give you the face value, which was much higher, and we'll give it to you as a loan. That's your collateral. those are the people who got the real bailout. I mean, that's the one that nobody wants to talk about. But anyway, my point
and just to be clear, I just want people to understand it, because you're going to hear mark to market. When if I've got a like a some type of bond that I got that a 5-year bond, let's just say at 3% when interest rates were low, and now it's not terribly valuable. It's worth a lot less than I paid for it, because nobody wants to be stuck in for 5 years in something that's only going to give them 3%, when I can go to a commercial, a retail bank and get a 4% a CD for 15 months right now. The mark to market means, like, how much would you get if you sold that security to someone who know they're only going to get 3%? It's secure, but like it's only going to get 3%. You're going to be losing against inflation. Right. So the value of that is low. That's mark to market. Par is what I paid for it and anticipated what the value would be.
Right, that's right, and so it's a massive backdoor bailout, and it's mostly to the banks that were going to fail in the future and now will not, because they now have a rescue program in place, and that's a bailout to their shareholders, that's a bailout to their executives, and that's a bailout to their bondholders, which is exactly what was said was we're not going to ever do again.
What do you say to the response, like, well, there's no tax dollars involved?
Yeah, of course there are tax. I mean, there are dollars involved in terms of what individuals are going to end up paying for this. I mean, it's supposed to be done through bank assessments. Well, what does the bank do when they get a big assessment? They try to figure out a way to make up the money on the back end, and ultimately that rolls down to their customers. Maybe they increase their overdraft fees by a little bit. It's a ridiculous argument. This was obviously a bailout. This was a bigger bailout than you even think about, because when people are arguing about this, they're really arguing only about the protection of depositors through the insurance that are uninsured. But it's that term facility that we were just talking about that's the real location of the bailout. But anyway, let me just make one last point, is that the entire modus operandi for those who orchestrated this is to get out of being blamed for it. So everything that you see a David Sacks say, everything that you see a Janet Yellen say, everything that you see a Jerome Powell say is designed to remove themselves from blame. And I will just briefly plug the story that we ran. I guess I actually ran it last night because the New York Times kind of scooped me a little bit. So I ran it like 2 minutes later, which is that in the moments when the federal regulators were figuring out what to do last week, they had come up with the plan, and they were just writing the statement out, and Treasury and the FDIC and the administration wanted to include the fact that there was a regulatory failure, and Jerome Powell blocked that language. He did not want any mention of regulation, supervision, or accountability, because that would all point back at him. And so he forced that out of the joint statement, and he even tried to influence the president's statement. Think about how extraordinary this is. You have the Federal Reserve Chairman saying, don't put regulation in your statement, Mr. President, the statement coming out of your mouth. And he got him to soften that a little bit, although the next day Biden came out and said there was a regulatory failure and we got to look at it.
Well, but how is this tenable here, David? I mean, like you've been sounding the alarm on these rapid rate increases by Powell. We've been talking about this on this program. Biden's inexplicable decision to keep him on for whatever reason is now hurting the administration. Like, what is the status of Jerome Powell's job security? Because if I were president, I mean, I forget exactly what the process would be to get rid of him, but actually, I guess that's my question. If Biden wanted to get rid of him, one, does he want to? And two, could he?
I don't think Biden would want to. I think the institution, when they see a liability there, potentially they take care of it on their own. If Powell has lost confidence inside the institution, it's going to be a problem for him to regain that. So it's a little more inside baseball than Biden walking up and saying you're fired. But I do think there is a possibility of that. And the hilarious thing about this, of course, is that in that 2021 conversation around should we renominate Powell or not, the people on the renominate Powell side, the Josh Barrows, the Matt Iglesiases, Dean Baker, I agree with him on a lot of things, but that's where he was on this, and several others, their entire argument was, yes, he hasn't been great on financial regulation, but the macro stuff and the interest rate stuff is more important, and he's been great on that. And since that time, we've gotten two bits of information. Number one, he turned his interest rate policy on a dime when inflation went up, because they were all excited because he was promoting full employment. Well, he's abandoned full employment in favor of price stability. So that's number one. Number two, turns out financial regulation is pretty goddamn important. And it affects the inflation environment too. It affects the macro economy. And all of these people who said, "Oh, you can subordinate that. Financial regulation isn't a factor. The real work, you Philistine, the real work of the Federal Reserve is to promote employment in the economy." Well, you were wrong. You were all wrong. You were all 100% wrong. Financial stability is a key organ of the Federal Reserve's mission, and I'd be happy to strip it all from them because they're incompetents and they don't view it as part of their job either, which is why they failed. But it is right now, and you need someone in that office who actually knows how to do the damn job.
All right, so let me ask you. I get three more quick questions. One is related to that. It appears that the Fed is going to pause in their march to disempower labor because there's now a concern that the people who might lose their jobs are working in some of these banks. That's what it seems like to me. They have been hell bent in trying to sink the economy in some fashion. And when they get the opportunity to do that through the failure of these banks, they decide maybe they're going to pause the interest rate hikes. What's your sense of that?
Well, here's
is this the silver lining for us?
No, unfortunately, because here's the thing they're not thinking about and that nobody is thinking about is that when you engage in this big a rescue of the economy and you say that all insured deposits are going to be covered and we're not going to let any important bank fail, what do? You're inviting those institutions to take risks, and you're telling the market we're not going to have a problem because we're going to take care of it. And what has that created in the last week? Asset price inflation. We've seen crypto go crazy. We've seen the stock market go way up. And asset price inflation is also inflation. People think they have more money because they have more money in their portfolios and they're going to go out and spend again. So the inflation is now going to come through a different channel. And because the Fed is so blinkered that they think the only way to deal with this is through throwing a bunch of people out of work, it's just going to lead to throwing a bunch more people out of work in the aftermath. And they're having to clean up for their own mistake of weak regulation. And they're going to do it by pushing the economy into recession. That's what I fear.
Great. Did we need to bail out those depositors? Did we? I think there's an argument that you don't want to throw people out of work in those companies that have overexposed, like Roku, the people working at Roku. But in the final analysis, because again, like you say, we just set out word that, if you got, unless we reimpose some type of regulatory framework and structure for these banks, we've just basically put out the word that, you can continue to do this type of stuff. Should we have bailed out those depositors, or was that a function? Were we convinced that it was a systemic risk because essentially just like most of the people that we end up hearing from, it was a risk to them. And so they tried to make it into a systemic risk.
We shouldn't have bailed them out, and we didn't have to bail them out. And if VCs were, in fact, what their name is, which is capitalists, they would have covered their own company's potential losses, which wouldn't have even been that big in the final analysis. I mean, Silicon Valley Bank had these long-dated securities, but they were government securities. They weren't going to go too far down in value, especially if they were held to maturity. And in the final analysis, those are still good assets. And when the FDIC finishes its job, whether they sell it to another bank or they sell the assets off, the actual spread is going to be rather minuscule. It's not going to be more than the 10% haircut. It's probably going to be less than that.
For depositors. Okay.
That's what it would have been. Obviously, It's going to be a 0% haircut now. But the VCs have boatloads of money, and they had the ability to float these guys for a week. They're already invested in these companies, right?
Right.
Do they stand behind these companies? Do they believe in these companies? Do they think these companies are going to succeed? Well, then give them more money to get them through in a bridge loan or however you want to structure it to get it through this tumultuous week or two. Daniel Davies, who is a bank analyst, he was on. We had him on for a Q&A, and the way that he put it was, I thought, really, really spectacular and kind of cut to the heart of this problem. And I'm calling it up right now. The way that he said it was, if a bunch of hedge funds with $100 billion under management suddenly got hit by a cyber attack, and it turned out that none of them employed a chief technology officer, none of them used the widely available firewall software that they could have, would everyone just be given cybersecurity insurance provided by taxpayers? I don't think so. I mean, these guys did something wrong. The companies did something wrong, and they immediately got let off the hook for it because they whined and played a crybaby game. But the point is that they did something wrong. B, 90% of these startups fail anyway, and we've been having tens of thousands of jobs being lost in the tech sector for the last 6 months, and it hasn't affected the broader economy. Most of these people who are getting laid off are pretty rich, by the way. But the bigger point is that the VCs could have handled it. They have billions of dollars in reserve. They could have handled this situation for the short time period it would have taken for the FDIC to fix it.
What are the chances of getting 60 votes in the Senate or the House, whatever we need to roll back the rollback
to repeal the Crapo bill?
Yeah.
When you saw that bill be released by Elizabeth Warren and Katie Porter, not one of the Democrats who voted for that bill signed on to it. And they're all standing their ground. They're all holding the line. And as long as that's the case, you're not going to get anywhere close to the votes that you need. And this risk will continue. The Federal Reserve, the good news is the Federal Reserve has every opportunity to, on the rules that it discretionarily did, they have the ability to change those rules, tighten those rules in any way they choose. There's an internal review going on at the Fed. A lot of members of Congress want that to be an independent review. They have the ability to strengthen those rules for the stadium banks. Maybe they'll do so. But I think that's probably the best we'll see.
I mean, this is like the danger. This is what we talk about when, the whole accelerationist thing about, maybe if Trump gets elected, we'll all be able to come together as a progressive movement after. Like, Republicans break things. They pass this deregulatory bill with the help of some Democrats, and it's almost impossible once Democrats even get back in power for them to build it back up. Like, this is going to be an example of that. No regulation seems like it's going to get passed.
Yeah, I mean, what we know about financial regulation is that it exists on a pendulum. So a lot of risk is pooled. People take, probably very wild bets, and something breaks, and then the pendulum swings towards more regulation. Like, oh, we gotta fix the problem, and then everybody forgets about it, and the pendulum starts to swing back. That's where we were in the last, 5-6 years, is the pendulum swinging back. We had this breakage, but apparently that hasn't stopped anybody. So the pendulum's still going,
right?
And we'll get some other breakage in the future, and at some point it'll hit a tipping point and it'll swing back again. But I don't know that we're there yet.
That pendulum swang pretty damn quickly too, based upon the size of. I mean, you think about how long it took Glass-Steagall to get repealed after the Great Depression. Now that we've basically, shortened that time, what it takes to forget what happened in 2008 by like a. I don't know,
the 2018 bill, the Crapo bill, passed on the same week as the 10th anniversary of the failure of Bear Stearns. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about the short memory of Congress when it comes to these issues.
And it just took a few years for these like regional banks to explode to just nearly that $250 billion threshold. And they're all up there at this point. I mean, anyway, it's just infuriating.
David Dayen, always a pleasure. Good luck with your Twitter handle.
Yeah, so it's by the way, for Majority Report listeners, where I'm temporarily hanging out is at David_Dayen, Dayen.
Well, that is embarrassing. You got to use an underscore. You got to use an underscore. That is really, oh boy, God. All right. Well, tune in, check out David's Twitter feed to get some great deals on computers and hopefully maybe some cell phones.
Everything must go.
David Dayen, always a pleasure. Thanks, man. All right, folks, going to take a quick break. When we come back, the Letterhack will be joining us. Matt Strackbein. Strackbein or Bean? Bein. And filmmaker or filmmaker? Janek Ambros will be joining us. The filmmaker of Mondo Hollywoodland and the animator, the creator of Mondo Hollywoodland, the comic. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us, Janek Ambros, the filmmaker of Mondo Hollywoodland. You can see an ad for it right there.
Whoa.
And Matt Strackbein, the Letterhack, who actually created this entire comic based upon the film. All right, let's just get right down to the burning question. Matt, we'll start with you. What is the Letterhack?
Oh, good question. The Letterhack is a prolific letter writer, and particularly with comic books. What little fame I have is from being a huge nerd and getting a lot of letters published that I would write to comic book editors. So in the back of the book, they have a letter column, and I was in there weekly for years.
Oh, that's interesting. I
Yeah.
find it hard to believe that anybody who's making comic books is really not getting their fame from being a huge nerd. But leaving that aside, all right, Janek, let's start with you. The film comes out in 2019. Tell us a little bit about the film. It looks, and I haven't seen the film yet, but I'm inspired now by the comic book to go watch it. It looks insane.
Yeah, it's totally insane. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Elaborate just a little bit more than that.
It's about a politically confused but groovy mushrooms dealer who traverses through Hollywood and kind of encounters all these goofy characters to find the meaning of the word Mondo. So it kind of has this like kind of inspired by like John Waters, Robert Downey Sr. kind of experimental psychedelic film.
Mm.
Yeah, there was like a quality of like Putney Swope in some of the.
I'm a huge Putney Swope fan. Yeah.
Yeah, that I saw in like in the previews, and when I see Mondo for whatever reason, I always think of Michael O'Donoghue, who was a Saturday Night Live writer. Maybe you don't know him, I guess. I mean, I'm dating myself. He was in the 70s. And his film, you can find it, I think it's probably on YouTube. But it was Mr. Mike's Mondo video, and it's nuts. But it's worth checking out. All right. So Matt, what inspired you to make a comic book? I mean, usually it goes the other way.
Yeah. Well, in this case, so you guys remember over Halloween, I did all of those spoofs of you guys as the Scooby-Doo gang.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, he saw those, reached out to me and said, that would be great for the adaptation of my movie. Are you in? I couldn't accept the job right away because I had, other obligations. So I watched the trailer for it and I was immediately like hooked. So I came up with some test pages, sent them off. The rest is history. I made the comic. I don't know. What was it? Like 4 or 5 weeks later, something like that.
I got really lucky because like Twitter scares me. I don't like Twitter. I usually just like look at hockey highlights, and then I just stumbled.
Good man.
Yeah, I'm a huge Devils fan, by the way. Not
get off, get out of here. Although you have that with Bradley, but anyway, go on.
You guys will have your TV show, or your sports show about the Devils winning the Stanley Cup this June. So.
Whoa!
Not if they have to face the Rangers in the first round. Anyway, go on.
We've gotten sidetracked.
The algorithm kind of brought me to Matt, and I got really lucky, and I just love his work. And I was just like, what is this? And I reached out to him, and I sent him the movie, and I was just shocked he responded to it because it's a very odd movie, and then he just did an amazing job. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than just it was like magic.
Well, Janek, why did you want to do that? It's cool, but like, what made you think that like, I've made the movie, now it needs to be a comic book?
Well, it's one of those things where it was like 5 years ago when I was trying to make some of my other movies, I had like a Francis Perkins biopic, and like executives were like, who the hell wants to watch a movie about Social Security, that kind of shit. Yeah, exactly. I'm like one guy.
She grew up in Worcester. She went to Classical High, which is where my folks went, actually, high school. So
there's a scene in Worcester in the script. But anyway, I was kind of hitting a wall, and I made this movie for like $10,000. I got some good advice from. I kept bothering Francis Ford Coppola's lawyer, like, over every month. I was like, can I get his advice? Finally, I got a hold of him, and he was like, make a movie with an iPhone. So I was like, okay. So I just kind of made this crazy film. And, it's a movie like this has a hard time, penetrating an audience.
Right.
So it's just kind of this, I wanted to kind of keep this life cycle of the movie. And I figured, a graphic novel would be a cool way to kind of like reignite it a little bit for an audience. And like I said, Matt just did like magic. I don't even know. It was bizarre to witness because he just did it. And it was just like, it was a bizarre, it was a great experience,
Well, okay, good. So right.
Well, I was going to say, just in terms of movies and comic book adaptations, not every comic book needs to be a movie. I think a lot of people would disagree, but I would say that every movie could be a comic book. That's not a problem. Like adapting something that already exists, there's your pre-visualization. So normally I make a comic book based off a script, and 50% of that is me wondering, okay, they've described some of this, but for the most part, what's this going to look like? Well, here's the movie. The whole thing is right there in front of me. I didn't have to think at all. So it was just drawing what I saw on the screen. And that really did give me a leg up. It was unconventional compared to normal, but, it expedited the process.
In that process, were there places where you took like a little bit, like you reinterpreted some stuff and maybe like, tried to either emotionally fit a different medium or reinterpret it? People do this with plays all the time. Like there's an Ibsen play that was just rewritten that's on Broadway right now that, more or less sort of updates it in different ways, stages it in a different way. Was there any of that was involved in that? And if so, like where and how?
Well, yeah, totally. First thing I did was I made a list of timestamps and tried to translate that into pages. So it was like, there's a lot in the movie. It's very fast paced. So like a few seconds could be several pages. So I had to really like think about it, right? And I watched a movie maybe like 12 times just in that initial stage of trying to break it out by page and then by panel. And it ended up being like 90 pages long, which was not practical. So we got on the phone and talked about it really quickly, and didn't talk about it that long at all, which I thought there'd be more of an editorial process, but we sort of both saw eye to eye right away on what should stay in and what could be cut. And so that's cool because the movie and the comic book are not like redundant. Like you could read it or watch it and have a unique experience. They stand on their own. But the film is very, Mondo, right? That's just like the ultimate word. I don't want to give any
What
spoilers.
does that mean?
Mondo,
I'm joking. I was joking. I was joking, but that was how I was going to open up the interview.
It is actually a subgenre of exploitation film. Normally, you could probably describe it better than me, but it's usually like a pseudo documentary style.
Yeah, the Mondo's a subgenre, and it's very crass. This was like very like late 60s, 70s. And I decided it's not like that. Like it's not like very crass and like just kind of like crazy exploitation. Like people kind of joke it's like a wholesome drug movie because like I didn't go this route of like, some of that kind of weird, Mondo's a weird genre. And some like Mondo purists are like, there's not enough like sex and nudity and like weird stuff. And I don't know. I didn't really have like a lot of interest in doing that. So I like I said, people kind of call it like a wholesome, drug conspiracy movie. So it's kind of, it doesn't have, it's got some of those like Mondo purist elements to it.
But keeping with the theme that it didn't have to be like traditional or conventional, those are the best words I can think to use. I was able to put scenes on top of each other. Certain pages can be read a few different ways. But by the time you get to the end of the page, you'll understand what's happening in the story. And so to answer your original question, like, yeah, there were times where I had to think it wasn't a compromise as much as it was a creative license to combine scenes over top of each other. And so when you read the comic, you may be like, wait a minute, what's going on here at first? And then like I say, by the end of the page, you'll understand exactly what's happened.
Interesting. And so Janek, was there any like, and you can tell us, was there any, like when you saw it, were you like, oh, darn it, like I didn't want this interpreted that way, or was it that? No, there was none of that.
It was amazing because there's
Matt,
like,
we won't tell Matt.
There's like 8 or 9 3-act structures in the movie because it's an ensemble, kind of like an Altman movie where it's like you know,
That was the other thing. It reminded me of The Player a little bit, just from the from the trailer. There was just a quality.
That's one of my favorite movies of all time. But yeah, just kind of like shortcuts and stuff like that, where it's like there's so many 3-act structures, and somehow when I spoke to Matt, he like it takes a lot of like dissection, because like it's a goofy movie. Like I'm not trying to say that's like this complicated writing process, though it was. And Marcus Hart, who's a co-writer on it, is also a big Majority Report fan, I should say.
Oh, wow.
So me, him, and Chris Blim, who's also the star and producer, we kind of made this madness where like we would write and shoot at the same time. So like I remember being at a bar and a car exploded out on the street. So I ran with my cell phone and I just shot it. And then we wrote that into the Antifa stuff. So like there was this kind of really complicated but organized chaos, and Matt just understood it immediately. Like I was really just shocked, because it's like, it's one thing to be like, oh, I like it, it was fun, it was stylistic and gonzo, whatever, but he understood it all in like one conversation. He understood that all. So I remember him pitching me the idea of like, and I just go, do whatever you want. I mean, so I was just really shocked by his ability to kind of understand what we were trying to do, because it is such a bizarre movie. So I'm still kind of, stressed. So no, there was zero issues other than like a line of dialogue here. But like, no, I was so thrilled when I was looking at the pages he was making. I was just like, keep going. I don't know, just do whatever.
It's funny when you said shortcuts, it reminds me that I think it was actually also Altman did Shortcuts, which also was very much about like that, just sort of out and around. I think it was LA, right? I mean, it was LA.
Yeah. And then Paul Thomas Anderson did Magnolia, which is a kind of derivative work of that. And it kind of has this just constant cycle of characters going in this chaotic, frenetic way. But like, there's, like I said, there's some thought and structure behind it, but first and foremost, it's silly and fun,
So, I guess I have two. Well, Matt, are you thinking about doing this for other movies? And then sure. And then are you guys planning, like, is there a future collaboration here where the animation? I don't want to put any pressure on you guys. I'm just curious what's next here.
Oh, we are. Yeah, we're already talking about it. That's in the works as we speak. There's like I said, any movie could be a comic. Reach out, if anybody wants to make their movie into a comic, we can do that. And my thing is, I did all of the adaptation. I did all the lettering, the layouts, all the art, the pencils, the inks, and the coloring. I'm one-stop shop. I used to art direct for comic books, and I used to edit for comic books. So being able to like jump in and do any one aspect or all of them is totally my wheelhouse. So but we weren't even done with this, and we were already talking about the next project, and we've got a few options, and I think we're honing in on one, but more on that.
Maybe we can do a Francis Perkins graphic novel.
Honestly, that would be pretty good.
That would be great.
Pretty cool.
That would be really cool. It really is neat. Where can people can see? Well, let's start with this. Where can people buy the? Oh, well, let me ask you this, Janek. In what order would you like if I'm to consume both of these? What order? Have you given any thought to like what's the best experience to do the graphic novel first or the movie first?
Whatever the person wants to do. I don't think there's a specific way to do it. I think it's kind of neat to have the graphic novel first, but I also think the movie maybe makes more sense. But I think I'm so curious to see what it's like to read that and then watch the movie. So either way, I mean, I think it's I think it's chill either way.
My wife definitely she's my go-to proofreader most of the time. She's an educator, so I always rely on her. So she read it and then said, I got to watch the movie. So she like dropped everything, watched the movie after that, and she was like, oh, wow. I mean, you did such a good job adapting it, but it really is its own unique experience.
She liked the movie?
Oh, yeah. Loved it.
Is it the first time you guys have found that out? It's good. We're bringing you guys together. Here it is. Here is the comic, and we'll put up a link.
Yeah.
We'll obviously post a link. This is where you can buy it.
That's
Um,
CWS Bookstore.
Super cool. And
Yeah, that stands for Comics Wellspring. They're out of Plymouth, Michigan, so it's an American-made product. Those folks are fantastic. They printed the book. They also crux.
It's beautiful. It really is beautiful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, they do a great job, and they're great for independent creators like us because the crux of the industry has always been distribution. So they'll print the book and warehouse it, and so retailers and readers alike can just go to cwsbookstore.com, look for Mondo Hollywoodland, and you can get a physical or digital version of it. But since we're big fans of the show and we met through like the community, so out of appreciation for having us on, we have a discount code that folks should use, and you can get 70% off the physical book.
Wait, what? 70% off?
Yeah, for
That's
30
too
days.
much. That's too
Well,
much,
guys are
Matt.
not business. You guys went to the Sam Cedar School of Business.
Well, if you want the digital copy, if you can't wait for the physical copy to show up, you can get that for $6. But 70% off the physical book for the next 30 days if you use majority at checkout.
You know what I would do? I would get the 70% off, and then I'd buy the digital too. That's what I would do.
There you go.
Personally.
Many
That's
people are
that's-
saying.
That's the way I roll. I
They
don't
make
just.
good gifts.
I have redundancy. That's my. And Janek, where can we watch the movie?
Amazon Prime. It's streaming. So if you have Prime, you can just watch it for free. I think the other question though is where can we see Bad Situationalist?
Ooh, Bad Situationist.
I met Mark Maron at a screening, and I mentioned that movie, and I think another one of them, and he looked at me like, "Who the fuck are you?" Like
Yeah,
how do you
that's.
how do you know what these are? Who are you? Just looked at me kind of like, what?
Bad Situationist is got some issues that
We should do a double feature. This is one of my points.
so many issues. But maybe sometime in the future. But pilot season and Caboose is available on iTunes, and pilot season I got to get out there too. So yeah, maybe we'll get
One of these days.
Maybe we'll get a comic made of it. Maybe a Bad Situationist as
Let's
a
go.
comic would actually be pretty
Yes.
insane.
See?
That would
I'm
actually
ready.
be pretty insane. All right, so Amazon Prime, we can watch, and that's it, or
That's kind of the go-to place. Just because
Okay.
you don't have to pay. If you have Prime, you don't have to pay. And then there's it's on Vimeo too. And then Sam, thanks for when I was this time last year, I was on the border. I was in Ukraine, and you gave out the address for the refugees. So I appreciate that.
did you IM?
Yeah, you. I remember I was
remember
there,
that.
and it was like this week last year. It was
Oh, wow.
or maybe last week last year. But yeah, I appreciate that. That was helpful.
Amazing. Well, guys, congratulations. Really looks
Thanks.
great. I can't wait to both. I've read the comic, but I can't wait to read the comic again and watch the film now. As soon as I'm allowed to watch a movie that doesn't involve like kids themes. Matt Strackbein and Janek Ambros, thanks so much for your time today, guys. Really appreciate it. We'll
Thanks,
put
guys.
links to all this in the podcast and YouTube and on the website. Thanks again, guys.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will take some IMs and we may take your calls. I'm not sure. I'm not going to promise because I always overpromise, and now I'm going to try and manage expectations. But we got a couple of clips. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only help this show survive and thrive, but you also get the half free of commercials, and you get you can IM us on the app during the fun half, all sorts of, that's basically all the bonus right there. Emma, ESVN.
Yeah, we've been discussing the Aaron Rodgers endless drama. the Lamar Jackson contract negotiations. And Will from Indiana, our ESPN correspondent on college basketball, called in and gave us a rundown. I know your brackets are probably already filled out by now, but you can fill out other, shortened brackets at this point, I think, even though, wow, were there some upsets yesterday, Bradley. But youtube.com/ESPN show. Check it out.
Matt.
Can't believe Princeton won. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't care about college basketball.
Whoa, really? I find that
Look,
surprising.
I don't care about college basketball that much either, just because I prefer my players to get paid.
Yeah, and to be adults and professional. But I mean, hopefully there's some buzzer beaters or something. But on Left Reckoning, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, talking to Jamie Peck about Cop City and where we're at 3 years post George Floyd. Patreon.com/Left.
She's down there now, right? Is that right?
She's doing videos. She's been talking to people about it.
Oh, I see.
And yeah,
I thought she was down there.
Maybe she was down there. I don't believe she's down there right now, but we'll find out.
Okay, I thought somebody just sent me that over the weekend, or not over the weekend.
No, but she was, right? Yeah. So.
Well, check it out. Matlack Media, folks. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
And the alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Dayen.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dayen.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males
Psych. Fuck 'em. Snowflake says what? What? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
and the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African, and the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. It's the fun half of the program. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, Matt, Bradley, you listening,
All of
watching.
us.
Tucker lying. If nothing else, Ben Shapiro is consistent. He came to the University of Michigan when I was a student. My roommate went to his talk and asked about abandoning school lunch programs. He said the same horseshit about feeding children should be a parent's number one priority, feeding them before yourself. And if that parent fails to do so, the state should step in and essentially abduct the children from their parents.
It's
demonic.
It's personal pathology, not because we played him yesterday saying that free school lunches would not do anything to alleviate child poverty. Because
Except for
it obviously would.
Except for, yes, it is absolutely obvious that it would. And how does this genius expect us to be aware that we'll catch some of the parents who are eating their food. Like, I don't know how you prove that. But it's just absolutely insane.
Well, just do what Texas does and deputize citizens to report on parents who they think aren't feeding their kid enough.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm sure he's in favor of that.
You keep the government small.
Or if their kid is trans, maybe.
Lunatics. Safety officer. Oh, yeah. We fixed that. Safety officers. Thank you. Brooklyn Sue. Here's an idea. What about buying a block of seats for a Brooklyn Cyclones baseball game this summer for local MR folks? An animal shelter does this near me. It's a fundraiser every year. Baseball at Coney Island is always a fantastic experience. That actually could be pretty fun to do.
That'd be fun.
I'm confused.
We just hang out with people at the ball game?
Oh.
Yeah, we buy a block and then resell them as like a junket.
Oh, that would be great.
I was thinking about that. As like doing a cruise.
Right.
And
cruise.
The only way I'd get back on a cruise would be if that's the sort of situation. But that'd be kind of fun.
A 3-day cruise, maybe? I
would love that. In a warm place, right?
Well, we would do it maybe like in the summer, the spring.
Okay, yeah. Just not like around, this area, like in a warm
the eastern seaboard.
Yeah.
Well, you go down to Bermuda.
Yes, perfect.
My grandparents took me on one Caribbean. It was interesting.
I'm all about cruises now, man. Cruising life. I get cruises.
Well, especially now that you know that you left food on the table because you didn't know that. Like,
exactly.
Yes,
it's all free.
You literally left food.
Yeah.
I just like getting the tan. That's all.
Bingo Dango. Can you please dunk on Timmy Pool for his meltdown about Bandcamp removing his music? Also, shout out to RM Brown for hitting 50,000 subscribers, a real win for the muscular class. Wait, I didn't even know this. That Tim Pool had a meltdown about his music on there.
We'll look into it.
Yeah. But let's go. It's Mo freaking Dernity.
Modernity.
It's Mo freaking Dernity. I'll let Modernity slide, but this Mardernity, malarkey's got that.
It's
Modernity.
Just say modern in your head and then itty.
I ain't got to do shit.
Yeah, thought police.
Yeah. I'm not pronouncing anything correctly.
You're right. I mean, like being a grammar police person is.
Dude, it's modernity. Modernity. You can be rude now. All right?
Like saying my dignity.
The Massachusetts Supreme Court, in a case about let me just do a couple of these quick stories. The Massachusetts Supreme Court, in a case that sent waves of consternation, according to the New York Times, across the state, where many local select board and school committee members have emerged battle-scarred from the coronavirus pandemic and fierce disputes over masks, vaccines, and remote learning, stemming from a lawsuit filed against the town of Southborough, Mass., bunch of snowflakes, by residents who said selectmen had silenced her unlawfully. The decision pushed back against attempts to mandate good manners. It struck down as unconstitutional Southborough's civility code for public comment at meetings, which required respectful and courteous discourse free of rude, personal, or slanderous remarks. It reversed an earlier Worcester County Superior Court ruling for the town, which lies between Boston and Worcester, has about 10,000 residents. I'm quite familiar with Southborough. Bunch of snowflakes. Apparently, she called a board member, this Daniel Cullen, to cut her off and accused her of slander against town officials who are doing their best. This guy also seemed to, like, he could have used a rudeness reprieve too. Look, you need, and then she said to him, this woman, look, you need to stop being a Hitler. You're a Hitler. I can say what I want.
You're a Hitler.
And the original court found that her reference to Hitler was certainly rude and insulting. But the Supreme Court said, yeah, it's rude and insulting, but it was protected speech nonetheless.
Hell yeah.
I mean, look, we have in Congress, right? There are rules in Congress where you need to maintain some measure of civility.
But that's like workplace rules.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I wish there could be a middle ground on some level, but I guess it's really more about, like, you have 2 minutes, and if you want to call me Hitler for the whole time, then you get over it, and that's it. It sucks, but don't be such a snowflake, because it's better than that than shutting people down, I guess, in these town halls.
We talked with Thomas Kennedy on Left Reckoning, and DeSantis' legislature, I guess, is thinking of a bill, proposed a bill that would make it illegal to accuse someone of racism without proof. So I would say, like, this is better than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, want to just do a shout out to the guys in Yo La Tengo. Ira, Georgia, and James, they had a show down in Nashville, Tennessee. They opened up with their first set, and then they took a break, came back to play the rest of the show in drag. Now, Tennessee just passed that drag law that you're not supposed to be doing drag in public. And here's a picture of James. And there's Ira. Wow. Ira put on a big wig too. I think in the next, there's one more shot of maybe one more where Ira's
That's awesome.
Jamming out with the wig. That's on
really
there.
Great.
These guys are great. Their music is great. They are great people.
Wow.
So good for them. And I would love to see bands do that.
If you play Nashville or Memphis, yeah.
Do it. There's a lot of bands that go down to Nashville and Memphis.
Yes.
That would be great. That would be great. And they were asked, like, by the Tennessean, like, what they didn't make any, statement about the law. They didn't say anything. They just said in a statement that they put out, what we did last night couldn't have been clearer and requires no further comment. Good for them. Good for them. Come after them. I think they were trying to get, cited. Good.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be really righteous civil disobedience of first a ban to take. I mean, that is.
All right, let's get to this. Emma, do you want to throw this?
Sure.
I mean, it is pretty fascinating. Like, we mentioned that Jimmy Dore clip with David Slack. Maybe we'll play some of that. David Sax, but I've complained in real time. Janine and I would complain about Jon Stewart's politics. I certainly complained even more so with his rally for nothingness or whatever it was that he was doing. But I don't know. His politics seem to have been improving a little bit.
This is great. And I mean, I understand the critique of some of his recent interviews, or that it sometimes falls back into hypocrisy shaming, which has limitations in terms of the value for the progressive agenda. But in this instance, when he's sitting down with Larry Summers, I found it to be incredibly effective. And I'm just amazed that Larry Summers agreed to do it, because what we've been seeing with Stewart so far is that he'd been getting, the Arkansas Attorney General or some state lawmakers agreeing, but national guys are like, well, I don't want to go into that minefield. Larry Summers was arrogant enough to do it. And it's for all of our benefit. This is going to sustain me. Like, I don't need to eat for a few days because just seeing Larry Summers get humiliated is everything I need.
Okay, let's see this.
What basically happened to us is we had massive stimulus and an economy that could only produce so much. We had huge levels of demand, and those huge levels of demand kept pushing up prices and pushing up wages. But ultimately, it was you put too much water in the bathtub overflows. You put too much demand into the economy, and you get high and rising prices.
But the San Francisco Fed says that demand is maybe 30 to 35% of the inflation. Wages are really around 20% of the inflation. There's a huge corporate profit aspect to it. There's a huge supply chain aspect to it. But our method for controlling it seems really much more focused on wages and employment.
There's certain sicknesses you can have where there's a drug and it has side effects. And everybody hates the side effects, and no doctor wants their patient to suffer the side effects. But if you don't address the sickness, you're going to have a bigger problem down the road.
But the stock market assets have gone up 150%.
Just pause it for a sec, just to clarify. So what he's saying here is that the sickness is inflation. The drug that people are going to take are the rapid rate increases by the Fed meant to discipline labor. And the side effect is that people are going to get laid off and that wages are likely going to be dampened and the increase is going to be dampened. So just to clarify, because this is sociopath speak for, we're going to put people out of work.
Now, also, let's also be clear. He's also pretending there's only one medicine that can be taken here. Right? We just heard him hear that 50% of this is, 30% is an increase in demand. 20% is a rise in wages. And let's also be clear, wages have been stagnant for so long that needed to happen. So the only medicine that he will prescribe is one that impacts essentially the 20% of people who have gotten increase in wages, or 20% of the problem. It will theoretically impact the 30% of demand. It will sort of stifle demand here. Of course, it will also stifle demand for housing and for building housing, which again will increase inflation because much of our inflation is also coming from rent. But the other 50%, which either will fix itself in the form of logistics or won't fix itself really for a while, the price gouging from corporations, there's no medicine for that, apparently, according to Larry Summers. There's only the medicine that makes other people feel some pain.
CEO pay has gone up 1,500%. Workers' wages haven't gone up at all. I think you're misdiagnosing the sickness.
First, John, inequality is a terrible thing. The most serious problem the American economy has been the cleavages between those like you and me who are very fortunate. That's why we need a strategy of strengthening
you and me.
Labor power in the economy. The question, though, is...
Pause it. Can you imagine? We need a strategy to strengthen labor power, and all he's doing is advocating a strategy to weaken labor power.
He's just saying this to cover his ass. And then as he tries to say, we're the same. Like, you're a rich guy, Jon Stewart, so you're the same as me, right? You know, who's actually held power and used to be the president of Harvard and has been advocating for these criminally wrong fiscal policy prescriptions for his entire career. We're in the same boat. And he keeps up with this line throughout the interview. It's pathetic.
Issue that somebody whose control is over setting interest rates and printing money.
I'm sorry, go back. We skipped a little bit. Yeah, go back. All right, go ahead.
Like you and me, who are very fortunate. That's why we need a strategy of strengthening labor power in the economy. The question, though, is is it an issue that somebody whose control is over setting interest rates and printing money can do much about? Now, you could say that they shouldn't have responded
Pause
to the
it now for 1 second. Let's also be clear here. The Fed has a dual mandate.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is price controls, essentially, stability in prices. The other is supposedly getting to the point of the highest level or lowest level of unemployment possible. So there's a dual mandate. So it's not like it's not outside their purview, but also he's also saying like, maybe it's like he's starting to admit that we're going to a foot doctor to fix our, throat or something like that. And he's like, well, this is the only thing a foot doctor can do is put a cast on. Go back just a little bit.
Labor power in the economy. The question, though, is it an issue that somebody whose control is over setting interest rates and printing money can do much about? Now, you could say that they shouldn't have responded to the 2009 recession by cutting money, by cutting interest rates. You could say that.
Yes,
but
you could.
Do you really think, and certainly that wasn't what progressives were saying at that time.
It doesn't matter.
At that time, progressives were saying we need lower interest rates so people can borrow money to buy houses and put people to work.
But they were
lower
stimulating
interest rates
it
for car
at
loans.
the corporate level, where they just put the money in the hands of the bankers and say, you decide. This pandemic was the first time the government, in my opinion, did the thing that they're supposed to do in a crisis. When you look at the stimulus payments that went out, 70% of it was being used for rent and food. And if you look at the recovery in the pandemic versus the recovery from 2008, when you stimulated the economy at the demand level, jobs had plunged in the pandemic, and then they shot back up. The recovery in 2009 was painstaking, but the stock market did great. So our fiscal policy and our monetary policy has always been on the side of corporate easing.
Just so we're clear, if you talk to African-American voters, if you talk to Hispanic voters,
like I do,
voters who don't have college degrees, they regard the country's biggest problem as having to do with inflation. So while you may see this as having been tremendously successful, our fellow Americans who don't live as comfortably as you and I do have a lot of questions, John.
Okay, pause it. There's just so much bullshit
Larry
here.
Summers, Vox Populi, come on!
Yeah, he talks to everybody, people without college degrees, all the time as he's doing Zooms with the Bahamas in the background.
In fact, the person who brought me this pina colada has no college degree.
Okay, so first of all, it's a complete fiction that the stimulus payments are what drove inflation. It's just not true. It's just not true, but he's returning to that. And secondly, oh gosh, I totally had what was my other point? Well, his perspective on inflation. He's lying there too about who's really concerned about inflation. There are people, of course, regular people who were concerned, like the price of milk is going up, the price of gas, food, etc. They were concerned about it. But a majority of the panic in the coverage and from the business community comes from the fact that creditors were freaking out with the rise of inflation because the value of the debt that they hold lessens as inflation goes up. And so that's Larry Summers' concern. That's wealthy people's concern. Because if they really cared about the regular person, they would not be in favor of increasing these rates at such a rapid rate that it's going to then discipline those same people that they say that they care about on the consumer side or on the buying side. It's so ridiculous, but
and again, we know that 30% of inflation is a function of increased demand. And frankly, I mean, if you look at the areas where the demand was, it wasn't from people necessarily who were getting, increased unemployment or whatnot. I mean, if anything, you could say like maybe that enhanced wages a little bit, but he's
That's not
again
the inflation that those non-college educated folks are concerned about, though.
Right.
It's basically that inflation was gas, was a huge one, and rent ultimately. But we know why there was inflation with gas. Aside from what was happening in Ukraine, it was they shut down refineries. They wouldn't restart them.
Because of wokeness.
Tremendously successful. Our fellow Americans who don't live as comfortably as you and I do have a lot of questions, John, about what's happened. And it's not hard to understand why they have a lot of questions in light of what's happened to their purchasing power.
But you're suggesting their
because we took a good idea and overdid it.
I disagree.
By providing for too much inflation.
But what you're not addressing is not all of inflation was stimulus. The tools that we have, though, are basically saying to somebody, everyone's paying more for gas and groceries, and that's really hard. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw 10 million of them out of work so that we all don't have to share that burden. Why aren't we attacking corporate profit in any way? Because that's been
Price
estimated
controls.
to be 30% of inflation, 40% of inflation.
I don't think it's a tenable view that all of a sudden corporations became greedy. Of course, there's monopolies in the economy, John, and we should be for
They've been
much
bragging
more
about it
aggressive,
on
much
their
more
earnings
aggressive
calls.
than we were.
They're on their earnings calls, they're saying our profits have never been higher. We're killing it. The markups during the pandemic are sometimes they're saying 70% of what they were.
If there was a huge increase in the demand for shrewd television commentary, I imagine the demand for what you do would go way up. And I imagine you'd convert that into higher wages and getting more and getting paid better.
You're saying it's the market at work.
I don't think you'd call yourself a gouger when you.
I would absolutely call myself a gouger.
When you did that.
And by the way, the effect of the talk show business is very different than the effect of ExxonMobil, right? I mean, let's be fair.
Isn't this show going to be on Apple TV?
Correct.
And I think Apple TV is worth about 5 times as much as Exxon. I think Apple's price, since the stimulus began, Apple's value has gone up by about $1.2 trillion.
Right.
That's $4,000 for every American, just in increase in the value of Apple.
You just made my point for me.
Do you feel that Apple is somehow gouging or doing something wrong?
Yes, of course. And Exxon is, and Mobil is.
All right, I'm just sorry. That is so good. So he needed an ad hominem. He thought he really got him there, right? You exist in society. You work for a corporation, John. I'm gonna lay this trap.
Curious.
And when John didn't did attack his parent company, conceded it, he had nothing. He just sat there like a lump on the log.
No, I mean we have price controls. We have other mechanisms that Larry Summers has never advocated for. We have price controls. We have the ability to nationalize refineries.
Mm-hmm.
We have the ability, and let's be clear, that's what's going on here. It was the refining capacity. There was certainly supply shocks because of Russia and Ukraine and Saudi Arabia, but it was refining capacity for things like gas. And it was, in many instances, with a lot of these corporations, we don't need to ramp back up in terms of production because we can just raise prices. If we're selling, we're selling 100 lollipops a day at $1 before the pandemic, and we fire half of our workforce because people aren't eating as many lollipops, and we shut down a bunch of our machines because we don't want them running because they cost us money. So after the pandemic, we can only produce 50 lollipops, but we can charge $2.50 for these lollipops, we're making more money than we did prior to the pandemic. We don't have to hire people because we can just say, like, we can only have the ability to put out, 75 lollipops now or whatever it is, or 50 lollipops, but we're charging 2.5 times what we charged when we were able to put out 100 lollipops. I'm making more money. I don't have to hire people. I don't have to bring on these people until the party ends. And it's like, okay, I'll hire those people back, and still getting $2.50 per lollipop until somebody starts to go like, hey, wait a second.
Right.
Because I'm going to do that because I'm going to get that money because I'm gouging. And just because in Larry Summers' mind, you wouldn't call yourself a price gouger, doesn't mean that he's not a price gouger. Yeah. That's Larry Summers. Like, we should really check with the source. Do you think you're doing something wrong? No? Well, I think we have our answer.
Yeah, that's how we deal with criminals, right?
Unbelievable.
All right, but we got to get to the end here, right? I mean, how much more do we have?
Like a minute.
All right, let's.
Point for me.
Do you feel that Apple is somehow gouging or doing something wrong?
Yes, of course. And Exxon is, and Mobil is.
So let's talk about Apple. Let's talk about Apple. Do you think Apple should just sell phones for less and not have enough phones? What would you have Apple do?
You're saying to me, John, market forces are market forces. And if demand goes up, are you suggesting, young man, that Apple should charge less than they could charge? Let me flip that on you. When there's a tightness in the labor market, what you're saying is the workers shouldn't do the same. That the workers, just following the same capitalistic principles that allow Apple to charge more for their phones, shouldn't charge more because wage inflation is driving inflation.
That's not at all what I'm saying, John.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Actually, it isn't. Every worker should get as high a wage as they can. It would be a terrible idea.
But the Fed is going to intervene. The Fed is going to intervene to make that not possible.
No, the Fed is intervening to control the overall level of demand growth.
And what will that do to the labor market?
Much faster.
What will that do to the labor market? What will it do to the labor market? It will loosen
likely to lead to
looser labor markets.
A somewhat looser labor market.
Exactly.
We hope to minimize that consequence.
Yeah, there you go.
Like, okay, so
first of all, Larry Summers has explicitly said we need to have 2 more million. What is it? 4 million people out of work. I mean, he's explicitly said this words. Like, pull the quote up.
Well, this is what Jay Powell said in his testimony about the 2 million people. When he was speaking with Elizabeth Warren, he was like, well, it's an unintended consequence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just that's where he got him there. So the demand for labor was increasing wages, but we can't have that. So the Fed has to crush labor. But when it comes to corporate price gouging, actually, let's not address that at all. And in fact, our solution is going to be let's crush labor some more.
Larry Summers said in June of last year, we need the jobless rate to rise to 5% for a sustained period.
There you go.
In January of 2023, sitting in his, from wherever it was.
Bahamas,
in the Bahamas. But he is on there going to say, more people need to lose their jobs.
And inflation, the inflationary period was highly concentrated in the first part of last year, too, right? And we're still raising rates to discipline labor. So the reality is that this is not about inflation. This is about disciplining labor, because no matter what the problem is, the solution in Larry Summers' minds and people who think like him is always discipline labor. Discipline labor. And so they're pretending that inflation is still this massive problem so that they can continue down this road. The labor discipline is the point.
In fact, I think Stewart undersold it a little bit. I'm looking at a chart right here from the National Income Product Accounts of the Bureau of Economic Analysis from the EPI. Corporate profits in 2020 Q2 to 2021 Q4, 54% of the normal recent contributions to growth in unit prices, 54% of inflation, a function of corporate profits, whereas between 1979 and 2019, it was 11.4%. Non-labor input costs shot up to 40%, 38.3, when it's typically 26.8%. So input costs are definitely higher, but there isn't a 40% disparity as to where they normally were.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 12% disparity. Unit labor costs also much higher in terms of the non-financial corporate growth. But let's be clear, that labor cost is sort of like there's a debt associated with that that has been ongoing. But if you've got a big jump in profits, man, like that's the first place we should be looking at if you're really worried about labor. If you're really worried about the working people that you're supposedly worried about.
Yeah. All the non-college educated people that Larry Summers talks to on a regular basis. Clown. I'm thrilled he got humiliated. I will return to that clip this weekend. It will make me very happy.
Good for Jon Stewart. I don't know if he was saying that same stuff back in 2008 and 2009. But
either way, we'll take it.
We'll take it. Meanwhile, we watch Jon Stewart slam Larry Summers for his cheerleading to throw people out of work. Again, Larry Summers calling for a sustained unemployment rate of 5% for years and years. Every time he gets in front of a microphone or a TV, he says, we need to throw people out of work. It'll be unfortunate, but it's the only way to save.
Yeah.
Save.
Take your medicine.
Yeah, exactly. You take your medicine. Here is Jimmy Dore, supposedly far to the left.
Doesn't he hate the neoliberals?
Yeah, supposedly far to the left of Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart takes it to Larry Summers. And Jimmy Dore has on a guy to the right of Larry Summers, if you can believe it, who's leaning on Larry Summers. When you hear the words neoliberal, what it actually refers to are the libertarians who came out of Mont Pelerin in 1947-48 and devised plans in which to push their neoliberal economic agenda, which is essentially the only time we want government interference of the market is really to help industry. That is basically what that neoliberal term means. David Sachs and his buddy Peter Thiel are exactly those people. They are the descendants of that ideology. And now it just so happens he also has a stake in Rumble, significant stake in Rumble, and also in Callin, and all of these other media outlets. And so who do you look for if you want somebody to explain the bank coverage and you're a lefty? Well, of course, Peter Thiel or David Sachs.
The guy invested in your company.
Exactly.
It's the largest upward transfer of wealth in human history. And they did it under the guise of helping workers, which is just... And
he's talking about
so
CARES.
How much did that affect the inflation? So that had to be...
Pause
so,
it. Now understand, like CARES Act was in... He's talking about the CARES Act from 2020. There was the Inflation Reduction Act, the industrial planning, but really the American Rescue Act. Like 70% of that went directly to people. The one that was passed by the Democrats when they controlled everything in 2020 or I should say, yeah, after the inauguration, right, in 2021. Sachs will slag that. Remember, that is the bill that cut child poverty by 35%.
Yeah, that's the one they really like to tee off on.
But Sachs' story is all that spending created inflation, and the Fed should have risen their rates earlier to discipline, and nothing about regulation, incidentally, on these banks. Doesn't come up until minute 38 of a 41-minute video, and only long enough for Dore to say, like, well, it's really, why didn't the Democrats, return it?
Yeah, bipartisan.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm a comedian. I'm not an economist.
Right.
But if you flood the market with $5 trillion, how does that not produce rising interest? I mean, inflation, right?
Oh, pause it. I'll tell you how that happens. There's a tremendous amount of slack in the economy because nobody's working. Nothing's being produced. That's how it does not create inflation. He's going to go on. Sachs is going to go on and talk about QE and this and QE, and we heard it all in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008. How we were going to be Weimar.
It's just so interesting to me that Jimmy Dore's framing is of Larry Summers. It's identical.
Well, here it comes.
Rising interest. I mean, inflation, right?
Yeah. So all this did begin, the sort of latest phase of easing began during COVID, where all of a sudden, well, remember, we had this COVID swoon in Q2 of 2020, where if you looked at the year-over-year numbers, it looked like a 30% decline in the economy because of the lockdown, something crazy like that. I mean, it looked like we're headed into a Great Depression. And so the Fed and the federal government threw everything they had at that problem. They, printed tons of money. It was QE on overdrive. Rates were basically zero. And, they started doing all of these acts that, were basically COVID relief bills. We can debate the quality of those bills. I haven't looked at that closely at what was in them. You're probably right about that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the money didn't go to the right places. But I would tell you that I think that was the start of this thing. And so I think you can definitely lay blame in a bipartisan way. But I do think that when you then got into Q1 of 2021, that was
Q1 of 2021 is when the American Rescue Act was passed. The one that paid $300 per kid for each parent. The ones that had extended unemployment. The ones that provided extensions on health insurance. Medicaid, that reduced the costs of the Affordable Care Act for people who were eligible for subsidies. None of it sufficient, much of it necessary. Again, cut child poverty by 35%.
Got into Q1 of 2021, that was a new phase because the economy had recovered. In fact, it was a pretty hot recovery by Q1 of 2021. And then Biden passed the American Rescue Plan, which is another $2 trillion of COVID relief along straight party lines. And you'll remember that Larry Summers at that time warned the administration, guys, I think you're taking a big risk here. This could really cause inflation. And, the administration sort of poo-pooed, said, oh, this is Larry being a troublemaker. And they disregarded it. And I think that was really the start of a whole new phase of problems. And then later that summer, when the inflation began to hit, it hit like 4 months later, again, that 5% print, they should have slowed down, but they kept going. Foot on the gas pedal. We then had, over $1 trillion of infrastructure. We had the Build Back Better bill. You had the Inflation Reduction Act. You had the CHIPS Act. And so they kept spending and spending.
Sounds like we need austerity.
And then at the same time, the Fed kept printing and printing. And so we entered a new phase of this thing where I think that just as the indicators were telling us, hey, we have an inflation problem, they didn't slow down. They kept printing and spending. And I think that's why The result of that,
we
just to
shouldn't spend so much
cut to the
money.
chase here, is that
Is that what you're
we've
saying?
now, for the last year,
I'm
had the
just a
most rapid
comedian.
rate tightening cycle I think we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
When you say rate tightening, you mean interest rates rising. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So the Fed, they control the Fed funds
I'm
rates,
just a
the
comedian,
overnight.
but I can't be responsible for the person I platform and then say this is good ideas.
Yeah. I would be ready to push back at you, but first I need you to define basic concepts like rate hike.
Also, let me ask you this. What will happen to my algorithm on Rumble? Am I going to be able to get like inflated numbers? Will that help me? Will I be able to get some advertising? No, the important thing to me is really spread the truth and have neoliberal policies on.
It's just so weird.
That are citing Larry Summers.
Yeah, it's just so weird that he didn't push back on the Larry Summers point at all, right? Because in 2020 he was criticizing the Biden administration. Well, I sent this. It's not even necessary, but like he tweeted in April 2020 making fun of the Biden administration for hiring Larry Summers to screw workers and families even harder. Larry fucking Summers, you can't make this up. You know the thing? Like it's just. All of this is just a way to screw Democrats, and now he's just completely bought in to neoliberal austerity politics by having this guy on. And it's just like, when he said neoliberal constantly, Jimmy Dore, I know, sorry, that screenshot didn't come out that great. But when he was talking about neoliberals constantly as a way to attack Democrats, just know that that's exactly what it is.
Right.
It's just a word that people know is bad.
He doesn't care. I mean, he doesn't care about any of those things.
The definition of neoliberal politics right there.
Yeah,
right there.
Without a doubt.
Right there. And good on David Sachs, who's really diversifying his corruption portfolio here, making inroads with grifters like Jimmy Dore, and again, hosting a fundraiser with Ro Khanna, who people have been suspicious about for a while and now definitely should be, with multi-$1,000 plate buy-ins
building bridges.
So he's fundraising for Ron DeSantis, fundraise for JD Vance, Blake Masters, now Ro Khanna, and guest on the Jimmy Dore show. So just like
yeah, I mean he's doing the whole round of the Rumble folks, and he's getting out there because there was some there was stories out there that Sachs in part had contributed to this bank run. Because, like David Dayen told us, the number of depositors in this bank was pretty limited.
Yeah.
And Sachs himself admits that many companies from his portfolio, of which he is a venture capitalist and investing in, have their money in this bank. And so he's out there, and I think he probably on some level was like had it in the ether. People were worried about their money that it enhanced the bank run. Again, we know the cascading reasons for this, starting with the rollback on regulation for banks these size. Then, starting with that same statute allowed for the Fed to roll it back even more. Mm-hmm. And then all the other subsequent things. But if this guy's argument was true, you would see bank failures outside of the stadium-sized banks. If it was just a function of like, well, no one could have predicted that rates would go up. Like essentially his argument is, you would see these failures happening in other places, but no, they're too small to be, doing these risky over-leveraged bets. And had they been subject to regulation, they wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he has Sachs, invites Sachs on to make the point that Sachs is really interested in making, which is that I didn't, my alarmism all over Twitter saying, my Chicken Little act, that was just after it was in receivership. So don't blame me. I'm just the messenger. But you set up the momentum to bail out these depositors.
Yes. Well, that's the point. And the reason why he did that, where they made it seem like this was a systemic failure, was to justify the bailing out of those depositors.
And I'm pretty sure that they deny that, or he gives him Jimmy asked him about if it was a bailout or not. Does he waffle on?
He says not a bailout.
Yeah, not a bailout.
Not a bailout.
The limits of anti-establishment politics, it's as shallow as a puddle. This is what you end up being, essentially, because the establishment can shift. It's basically just reactionary, like I hate daddy. It leads you down this road where you're completely untethered to the so-called principles that you espouse when you first got your start, of being anti-neoliberal, anti these kinds of ghouls who want everything to be left to the market, anti people who want to dismantle the regulatory state so corporate profits can gouge. You're having one of the number one people in this nation responsible for that kind of stuff, PayPal buddies with Peter Thiel, writing books with him about how diversity is hurting this country, on your program, and spouting the same bullshit that Hillary Clinton neoliberal shill was all about. Like, Jimmy Dore's politics are closer to Hillary Clinton than anybody in that space right now, or that he's talking, certainly than us.
Oh yeah, I mean,
but she's a woman.
That's the thing, is like they I think like when people accuse them of secretly working with the Republicans, because it obscures the actual fact, which is that they also work for the corporate Democrats by naturalizing their power over the party.
Corporate Democrat Jimmy Dore.
This is fun. Maria Bartiromo still has a program, apparently. She's on Fox, and I don't know where she's getting her news, but she is still like she will not let go of the pandemic narrative. And this is the other thing that people forget. Like now I know like there was a new evidence that came out today about that it was possibly like raccoons in the Wuhan market. And again, who knows? Maybe it was a lab leak. Maybe it was a bat. Maybe it was raccoon, maybe from the wet market. We don't know. There's no conclusive evidence of any of it. But the thing that people don't understand and are sort of rewriting history about this is that when that lab leak stuff was shut down, it was not that maybe it leaked out of a lab because they were studying it. It was natural. The story that was shut down was that it was developed in this lab. And the story that they shut down was that this was a plandemic. It's like almost like that whole moment and that whole argument from these COVID deniers has been completely forgotten, where the real story that was trying to be pushed was that this is all a fake, that this has actually been, this is a bioweapon that has been sent out.
The Chinese Communist Party.
By the Chinese Communist Party, that was sent out in conjunction with Bill Gates and his magnetizing COVID vaccine. And all of that seems to be like erased now. That's what was going on at that time.
No, it was just people looking for the truth about a thing.
Exactly. And part of the reason why they erase that history is because they want to write a new narrative going forward. And it allows lunatics like Maria Bartiromo and this supposed doctor, who I guess gave himself his own licensing as an optometrist or ophthalmologist, who also refers to himself as a senator and is. Look at this. This is just amazing.
Because the thing is, it was probably the worst judgment, the worst scientific decision in modern medical history to send this money to Wuhan, where the controls in the lab for safety weren't good, but also the openness and transparency of their government has not been good as well.
Yeah,
so this was a terrible mistake.
Well, there were also all these lies around the emergency.
Pause it to 1 second. And just even that, I just really contemplate this. They're studying viruses from that area. What's the option here? We're going to take these viruses and we're going to travel with them.
Yeah.
Is that the option?
No, the
Fly 'em
option.
out.
The
Fly 'em
option
out.
is that they never do this because they're
DHL.
inherently
Yeah, I mean-
untrustworthy because they're communists and they're Chinese.
Yep, exactly. We shouldn't be doing any of this sort of diplomatic cross, national stuff, because we should be preparing for war.
But also the openness and transparency of their government has not been good as well.
Yeah,
so this was
unbelievable.
a terrible mistake.
Well, there were also all these lies around the emergency authorization. They needed the emergency authorization to get the vaccines down everybody's throats. But in order to do that, they had to prove that there was nothing else on the market that could actually treat COVID. When we all know ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine were effective, weren't they?
No.
Well, we also know that prior infection is effective.
Wait, so he skips over. Okay, pause it. Yeah, so first of all, he pretends like he didn't hear what she said, as opposed to correcting her. The idea that hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin was a prophylactic was, I don't even know if like even well, I think some of the loonies did believe that.
I mean, Malone thought it was, and then he caught COVID and is like, well, I guess I didn't get the dosage right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the idea that it's actually a treatment, also, we know, total bullshit.
Yeah, been studied to death also.
And to be clear, even his response, even though he refuses to correct her, his response that we also know that COVID offers immunity after the fact. A, we didn't know that for the wild type. It did not appear so at the time. And I don't know if it was ever true for the wild type. We found out later that it was true for Omicron, but there is a cost associated that you can put up against the cost associated with getting a vaccination. That is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people died when they caught it for the first time. And you don't get to choose. Can I get the kind that's just going to make me immune for the future?
Yeah.
And you don't get to choose. Can I also get the kind that doesn't give me long COVID? So I'm not like, what is it, Inhofe? Or who was it? The senator who
Jim Inhofe from the Snowball guy. He has long COVID. That's part of why he retired.
I mean, you don't get to choose that. So yes, we now know that if you get the Omicron version, it will provide you some immunity from getting it again. However, if you die, you will also have immunity from getting it at the end because you'll be dead.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just like the level of irresponsibility here is just through the roof.
And he knows not to touch it. That's why he didn't respond there. He's a coward. He's hiding from the anti-woke mob.
All the ivermectin supporters, like Dorr, for instance, like that. This is exact, like when he skips over co-signing her there, that says everything you need to know.
Yep. Really just grotesque.
But also the openness and transparency of their government.
We already played. Yeah, we don't need to play it all again from the top. I think we're good. Let's play this clip just to remind you of the idea that anybody would get this kind of sentence for anything, frankly, is just absurd to me. But we convict people wrongly all the time in this country. If you don't have a philosophical opposition to capital punishment, like I happen to, at the very least, you should be like realizing like we're killing innocent people. Inevitably, we're going to kill innocent people. In this instance, a guy was put away with a 400-year sentence, spent over 30 years in prison for a robbery, an armed robbery that it turns out he didn't commit. This is NBC News.
In a Broward County, Florida courtroom, this is the last time Sidney Holmes will wear the prison uniform he's donned for decades, spending 34 years behind bars.
No longer is the wrong man confined to a Florida state prison.
He was serving an unheard of 400-year sentence for a 1989 robbery conviction. The original prosecutor wanted no chance of parole. He has maintained his innocence, and a recent reinvestigation by the state attorney's conviction review unit agreed, finding no evidence linking Holmes to the robbery, and that eyewitnesses likely confused him with someone else.
We had an opportunity to exonerate a man who's been in prison wrongfully. We had an opportunity to do the right thing today, to right a wrong.
Holmes broke down in tears while in court Monday, embracing Broward County State Attorney Harold Pryor. Outside, family members waiting anxiously.
It's over. Long time overdue. We have lost loved ones while he's been incarcerated. His father, his grandparents.
And then, dressed in a button-down shirt and blue jeans, the moment Sidney Holmes had been waiting for. Hugging his mother, Mary Holmes, crying, tears of joy.
I just praise God, and I thank everybody who's been so good to make this day possible.
I know this day was going to come sooner or later, and today is the day.
one by one expressing gratitude to the family members that had stood by his side for years.
Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Great, baby.
Grateful to everyone who never gave up fighting for his freedom.
Anything you'd like to say to community members who've been rallying behind you, waiting for this day?
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
I've been trying to see if there's any like payments planned for him, if he's going to have to sue.
Oh.
Or if it's possible that this board even like somehow immunizes the county or the prosecutors or the municipality from having to make these payments. I don't know. But there is, I mean, really, there's no amount of money that you could pay this guy
30 years of his life
that would be fair. But the idea that that's not like that like literally he's not walking out of that jail cell into a, you know, massive suitcase full of money is just absurd. This guy, he lost 34 years of his life, and it's not like, okay, I cut that loss, now I just move forward. Like, he's going to spend the rest of his life trying to just adjust to society after 34 years in prison. This is just inhumane. First off, like, why was the guy in there for 34 years, even if he was guilty?
A 400+ year prison sentence for an armed robbery based on an eyewitness account. I mean, like, this is just, the problem is that our justice system is not designed to find justice.
No,
it's a method of social control.
It's an emergency.
For a specific class of people, and people who look a certain way.
This is just one stat from the Innocence Project. One prosecutor disciplined out of 660 confirmed cases of prosecutorial misconduct in California, Arizona, New York, and Texas from 2004 to 2008. Like, that's 660 cases in 4 years. Those are the ones that they proved.
Yep.
We do this at an industrial scale, and like a small percentage of people get some sort of, freed after 34 years, and he's the lucky one.
Like, it's beautiful to see him with his family, but the framing of the story from the news is not a feel good one. This is a disgusting injustice in our country.
And we're not really prepared to deal with the mendacity of prosecutors or cops in this. I feel like we're still sort of asleep to it and how big of a problem it is for democracy.
And when Republicans make this about pathology, poverty about pathology, there are just generations of families ripped apart by this kind of crap. Even if it wasn't a wrongful conviction, just the incredible years and the punitive nature of our system, as well, as opposed to a rehabilitation system. Like that, it's ripped apart entire communities, entire families for years and years.
All right, let's read some IMs. We got to head home.
I don't know why I'm so pissed today, but
I mean, it's
Larry Summers has got me going.
this stuff is pretty angry.
Yeah.
Drewish, 34 years. That's like show life. He should get millions. Holmes deserves 100,000 for every single year he was in prison. Snacky Snacker Code. Sam, were you channeling Donald Duck when you said hydroquacazine? Can we have a shofar for Irish MR flying columnists? Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Here you are. Depressed Canadian, have you discussed with David Cross about his support for the death penalty? I didn't know that he did support that, but I have not. We've never talked about that. Brewmaster Woods. Oh, it's a little bit long, but wait, this is. I can't get your discussion of school lunches out of my head, so I want to give you a perspective from the son of two teachers from West Virginia. Google median salary for West Virginia teacher. Now you'll understand that we weren't rich by any means, but my brother and I never wanted for anything. My parents took care of that into the classroom with them and their students. Hear about teachers paying out of pocket for classroom student supplies, but that's not the half of it. It's nothing for a trip to the store to include a box of crayons or paper that would go with mom and dad to school. My mom taught elementary school, would start each year with knowing which kids would need different types of assistance in the morning, which kid wouldn't have had breakfast, which might need to brush their teeth real quick, or which might come to school with an extras in need of a sweatshirt or a jacket. Then they would start the day and deal with lunches when lunchtime came. My dad taught at the middle school my mom's elementary fed into. Mom and the teachers would pass along what they knew about students might need to my dad and the other school teachers. Dad was more low-key about it, but he took up where Mom left off. He was known for buying students lunch and paying off lunch bills for kids he knew would never come up with that money. It's continued even after he was formally warned and reprimanded for it. Top of that, my dad worked in HVAC for decades while he was a teacher. He won't admit it, but I know he and his drinking buddies would go out and help some of his students' parents when they had heating issues at home. Dad would call it help because he and his buddies would split a case of natural light and not take any money. But my dad showed up in commercial work van with the tools and materials to replace a heat pump, so his help was very specialized. He kept the heat on for many of his students over the years. I'm proud of my mom and dad for what they did for 40 years in the West Virginia school system. I'm proud to be a fifth-generation educator, and that's why it's my default stance to give teachers in schools whatever the shit they ask for. Jay Woods left his best.
Wow.
Great story.
Great story.
Duber. G is pronounced like she, like she's the man. But what about Northampton? Al Conniption. Did you just have a neurological event announcing that guest? Please announce a trigger warning next time you're going to confront us with the sound of a kiss from Jimmy Dore. Worcester Ice Cats. Mispronouncing everything actually means you're smart, and it's a sign of a big reader. Framingham is the worst. Yeah, no kidding. Glass Seagull. Larry Summers is a decrepit monster, but realize that anytime someone moves an inch in the direction of bemoaning COVID stimulus, they're headed in his direction. Hot take. I don't give a shit about PPP fraud. It is way overblown. In my estimation, we should be checking it, but it is the reason why we hear so much about PPP fraud is because they hate government programs. I mean, the upward transfer of wealth from the CARES Act was a function of the essentially the underwriting that that Treasury provided for the Fed. Mm-hmm. And it was essentially, like the classic, like bribe that needed to happen to give support for other people. The America Rescue Act was actually much better. That was the one in 2021, the one that Sachs really hammered. Vermont Ben. My cousin lives in Auburn, right in the border with Worcester. Nice town. Yeah, I know. I know where it is. Tomoff Link. Happy Casual Friday, folks. Here in Britain, striking healthcare workers have received a new pay offer. Strike actions have been paused while the unions consider it. Also, according to Tim Pool, milquetoast fence sitter is when you do a PragerU video to do historical revisionism to defend police officers shooting people who are not posing any threat of violence. Hugo's Burgers. Sam, I wanted to highlight your video entitled Anti-Woke Conservative Struggles to Define Woke. The timestamp 1620, Matt Leck is reading a tweet in an impressive Ben Shapiro voice, and you tell him to pause it. LOL.
Oh, really?
Time you asked Emma to pause her voice. This is the content I live for. Left is best.
Yeah, I forgot what the context of you telling me pause it was, but it was amazing. It was so good.
The funny part is Saul does that too.
Oh, really?
Well, I say to Saul, like always, I'm like, dude, go, take your plate up from the table. I'm watching a video. Pause it. So
but you're not telling him to pause his speaking.
Occasionally.
Oh.
He'll say that to me that way.
Huh.
We all know what caused COVID, not a wet market, a woke market, says Dave from Jamaica. Good one. Iowa Ryan. I watched this summer's interview and thought he came off as a lizard. Stewart did a great job, but Seder would have buried him. Sam, I watched your debate with Peter Schiff. You really humiliated him on his own show. Thank you for that. I get depressed living in Iowa, and I need those kinds of pick-me-ups to keep myself going. I don't even remember it. Was it on his show? I guess I called into his show. I think he had a radio show, if I remember correctly.
To debate the merits of gold.
I don't remember what it was about. I think it was about
fiat currency.
Yeah. Probably. I think so. I'm not sure. Militant apathy. David Dayen is swole today, spitting hot fire.
Yeah, he was pissed. I get it.
This just shows how tone deaf Obama was to put this guy Summers in a job, right?
Yes.
At some point, we have to come to grips with just how corrupt and broken law enforcement prosecutors are. Someone in that prosecutor's office knew this case was effed up. They could have stopped this man's conviction without a doubt. Without a doubt. There must have been something that they just kept under wraps. New Jersey Mailman, hey, you guys talk all the time about peace talks in Ukraine, but never expand on them. Can you please explain what you mean and explain how Ukraine could negotiate with a dishonest actor in Russia that is engaged in a genocide against Ukrainians? If you don't think it's a genocide, how many more mass graves need to be found, children kidnapped for it to qualify one?
I think
Why
they're
don't you
war
push
crimes.
for Palestinians to negotiate with Israel? Well, I mean, first off, I think the opportunity for that is probably gone. But certainly when there were negotiations. But we're not funding the Palestinians. So the point is not necessarily to I think the idea is that the United States has to be in a position of saying, and I think they've did this with Bakhmut, to be honest with you. I mean, I think they're already doing this. And that is like your territorial gains need to be essentially like realistic. Now, the other thing, from the perspective of even the greatest supporter of Ukraine and Ukraine getting military hardware, et cetera, the closer we get, and we may be close to that threshold already, to the 2024 election, the more Putin will calculate, the more likely Putin will calculate it's worth it for him to maintain this war because of the potential chance that Donald Trump becomes president or that DeSantis becomes president. Because then if funding gets cut off for Ukraine, Russia can outlast them. And so I think even from the perspective of the greatest Ukrainian hawk, as it were, or however you want to refer to that, there's a lot of value in the U.S. administration saying, like, look, you need to basically create for yourself what is your position that you will. Now, I imagine this is already happening. I would hope it's happening. And I think there's also probably no value in like openly saying like what the end game is for Ukraine, because you're negotiating against yourself. And the limitations that are associated with like if Russia's not coming to the table, they're not coming to the table. And but there's been reporting that goes both ways in terms of like who is, tapping the brakes about negotiations at different times. And it's hard for us to know. But broadly speaking, I don't think that there is like a value to an open-ended commitment because you can't make an open-ended commitment. Maybe in December of 2024, you'll be able to, but normal human, but and honestly, I think these calculations obviously are already being addressed. It's not a particularly profound thought that Putin is thinking like we can make it another 18 months. As long as he's bringing in people he doesn't think is going to destabilize him domestically to fight this war. It
kind of worries me that like people don't understand that point. Like Andrew Basovich was just on the Red and Green podcast saying like, we need to, our aid is contingent on like, we have to be clear about what the intent is. Is it like getting rid of Putin or is it like retaking land? Like these things are like, we can't just say like Russia's so bad we can't even consider this stuff. I just reject that perspective.
Right. I mean, it's important, I think, to reiterate at the very least, we're not looking for regime change. If you're interested in ending the war, not looking for a regime change in Russia. And then, I don't know if Ukraine can say, there must be some clear understanding, or at least some type of understanding of just how much the ability the Ukrainians have to take back property. I mean, take back land. So I don't know. Normal human. There isn't enough discussion within mainstream about how crisis is inherent to capitalist system. The idea that these events are special indicates something wrong or broken in the system is counter to historical evidence. Regulation can help, but inevitably leads to capital strikes and regulatory capital. Bailouts are seen as required to deal with acute trauma and are just another form of class warfare. The only durable solution is an end to capitalism. We cannot repeat this enough. I mean, I think there is some truth to what you're saying, but I wouldn't eschew a regulation in the meantime. Bullprog. Little Ronnie Puddinghead is trying to take Rosa Parks out of Florida textbooks. She was Republican just like our second best president, Abe Lincoln. Democrats won't teach you that. Tucker lying. We already did. New Wrangler. David Dayen knows where to assign the blame. Lawful waffle. Sam, you haven't heard of the part of the Old Testament that discusses badgering the hungry about personal responsibility? Oh, boy. Okay. Matty Moron. Apple exploits IP law and monopolistic power in the market to rent seek. LOL. Solvey Seder. The comedian Hofstetter did something similar to The Basement, wearing a dress at a recent performance in Tennessee. He made the point in his set to say he didn't do anything heroic or really even that notable, but I think he did a good job of highlighting the ridiculousness of the law. Anybody who does that is doing a good thing. Count me out. The thing about Apple versus Exxon is we don't always need every new Apple product. We need to buy gas every week. When the price of gas goes up, then literally everything goes up.
Yeah.
Larry Summers is such a dishonest moron.
Mm-hmm.
BB
He just thought he was getting Stewart. Like, you work for a corporation too. It's the we live in a society meme.
I recently was shopping for a new Toyota. $5,000 market adjustment added to the price of a $4,000 car. I asked the salesman if he got a 12% raise for the year. Surprise, surprise. He did not. Dan from Columbus. I remember Rush Limbaugh at the start of the pandemic saying COVID was both a bioweapon developed by the Chinese and also it's not a big deal, no worse than the flu. Hydrochloroquine truthers are still a thing. Update their talking points, Maria. All right, 3 more. Depressed Canadian. Somebody make sure he knows he can vote. Mind Pillow Guy. Can I get a shofar for my birthday? And the final I am for the week. Mark Monkey. Hey, MR crew. It's been a while since I checked in regarding my wife's cancer. Next week, she'll be getting a hysterectomy that should fully remove the cancer, but that's not the only good news. Yesterday, I got my acceptance letter from my college for their RN program. Very competitive program I bust my ass to get into. Hoping things are looking good upwards, but a shofar would be cool. Yes. Thanks for all the support. Congratulations, Mark Monkey. Wishing good luck to your wife. Bradley, Matt, Emma, great job this week. You folks, you did pretty well yourselves. See you Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah. but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out